Hi, everyone. My name is Scott Brick. I am the man lucky enough to have narrated so many of Nelson DeMille's titles over the years, including his latest. And I am so privileged and honored to be interviewing today his son and co author for this most recent trilogy. And in many ways, the book that cements his legacy, The Tin Men. I'm very pleased to welcome Alex DeMille. Alex, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Scott, for being here and for lending your talents to this book as you have for many. One of the questions I often get from fans when they learn about a new book or they know it's coming out is, who's narrating it? It better be Scott Brick. So I'm always happy to make them happy there. So
Well,
you really add so much to it.
that's very kind. I appreciate it. I think the first time I ever interacted with your dad, he was so kind. Somebody had sent in a fan letter. It was for the Lions game, and somebody had sent in a fan letter to the publisher, and he hand wrote on this letter uh, a note that said to the publisher, please send this to Scott Brick. I don't have his contact info. He deserves this as much as I do, which was an extraordinarily generous thing to say. And that was just the first of many. For the next 20 years, he and, of course, Patricia from his office would forward me hundreds of emails. And I've done 1,200 audiobooks. I've never had an author that generous. When I think of your dad, that's what I think of. So, yeah,
That's really wonderful. Yeah, he did. It's a lot to live up to because I do keep learning about new things like that. There's
yeah,
the way he would have, he would tell fans, if you want me to sign your book and personalize it, ship it to my office instead, and then I'll do that and I'll ship it to you. And
yeah,
for somebody at his level, I don't think is very common to do. Hearing stories of people who like I was writing my first book and your dad gave me all this time and he read it and
yeah.
gave me advice and just he was very um he was generous with his energy. He was one of those people. It would be easy to say he's an extrovert, but a lot of times with extroverts, it's like you kind of feel like they need the attention, they need the energy of other people. But with him, but it always kind of felt like he was giving it. He was giving it out.
Well, physics tells us there are only two natural states in this universe. You're exothermic or endothermic. You're
Right.
giving energy or you're taking energy. Your father was the ultimate giver of energy. And
Absolutely. Yes.
um, I know, though, that being the child of a famous father, it casts a long shadow. Um, you had a rare opportunity to work with him, to collaborate with him. And I know that you've written about that in the introductions to the three books. Of course, I'm talking about The Deserter and Bloodlines and now The Tin Men, the trilogy. Um, you wrote about it, you both wrote about it in the introductions, but if you could take us back to when that began and this transition that you made from being a screenwriter into a writer of fiction.
Sure. Yeah. I got a phone call from him. I think it must have been 2017. And what I had been doing up to that point, yeah, I got a MFA at UCLA Film School. I made
Go
a
Bruins.
film there. Yeah, it was a great experience. I gotta be honest, I'm not sure I went to a single sporting game as a typical like art
Neither did
student, but
I'm a Bruin and neither did I.
but I did enjoy the school spirit through like osmosis. But um so then after that, I was, muddling along a little bit. My film got some recognition, which got me an agent, and then got me a manager, and I was kind of working on a bunch of projects on spec and going on a million, they call it generals, where you meet people, all the different studios, and I felt like I was
Was that
that really excited me, but
Was that The
so,
Absence? Was that the film
yes,
that you're talking about?
yeah,
Okay, great. Yeah,
yeah. But of course, between that and then actually getting a film made, paid for and and greenlit and all that stuff. Can be a big gulf. And while I was working on that, kind of in the background, I was also doing editing, film editing. And ironically, the when my father reached out to me he said, "Hey, do you want to write a book with me?" I had just edited a film which was nominated for an Oscar, a short film. I waited for an Oscar, and I started getting contacted by people, I was like, it could have been a break for me as an editor. And then he calls me up and says, "Hey, you want to write for me?" And I kind of that was one of several reasons where I was a little hesitant. I mean, I was flattered, but working with your parent in a creative pursuit, even if you tell yourself, "I'm going to check my ego a little bit. This guy's a pro." It could have been really fraught.
Mm.
And I also just frankly wasn't sure if I could do it. But he had been trying to find a co-editor for a while at that point, and it just wasn't working. And he said to me, "You'll love it. It's easy. We'll do it together, and it's not so hard." I'm like, "What are you talking about? I've heard my entire life you've talked about how hard it is and how much of a pain in the ass it is doing this." So it was kind of funny for him to try to sell it in such a brazen, just a brazen lie about that it was going to be easy. But we so I said, "Look, I part of me wants to say yes to this, but because all he had at that point was a title, The Deserter, and a basic frame of we want this to be a male-female CID team that is pursuing this guy who's deserted the army and is in some other country. That was kind of it. Very loosely based off of Bo Bergdahl. That was kind of
Okay.
the pitch. So I said, okay, let me write a treatment and let me see if I can come up with a take that we like before I say yes and before you could take back your offer. Let's actually see if this is a good idea first. So that's what we did, and I worked on it. I gave it to him. He liked what I had done, and he threw in his stuff, and we didn't actually take that long to put together a treatment, and the editor loved it and said, "Let's do this." So that's how it got started, and it was really I have a very vivid memory of the first day I started writing the actual book. I was sitting down. I was in a library, and I just sat down. I'm like, "What the hell am I doing? What did I get myself into?" Because it was the gear shift in your head between screenwriting and novel writing, which I knew it would be different. Intellectually knew it would be different, but the actual process is just so, for me anyway, was so different. It did feel like my brain had to go through some sort of like transmutation in order to like go into this other mode and do it well. And I think I
Yeah.
learned. I mean, it was like a master class. Writing that first book with him.
I'm
It's very
curious
amazing.
if while working on the first book, you knew where the series was going to go, even just in terms of geographically. I mean, the first book, The Deserter, it's in South America. The second book, it's in Berlin, if I'm remembering correctly. Such a wonderful
Mhm.
Cold War callback. And then Tin Man is in the deserts of California. Did you always envision it as a trilogy and see where it was going to go thematically as well as geographically?
It was envisioned as a trilogy contractually. There,
Okay.
there was a three-book co-author deal. It could have, of course, been three. Didn't have to be the same characters for all three books, but everybody seemed to be happy with how the first one turned out. So decided, okay, let's do this as a three-book thing. Um, we didn't know at all. But for me, and I think he works this way a little bit too, setting kind of is one of the first things to decide on, and it really kind of drives a lot of the rest of the story. So for the deserter, when I decided on Venezuela, that I wanted it to not just be like generic exotic backdrop. Like I wanted it to be sort of about the country, but also about America because of
Hmm.
that of the country it is, and post-colonialism, imperialism, foreign policy, everything. It's complicated, right? So
Sure.
that was so then for the second one, I just knew just because you have to kind of have fun and entertain yourself. It's like my father has never written a book set in Berlin. It's one of his favorite
Oh,
cities. I was introduced to the city through him. We went there together in 1999 when I was
oh
in
wow.
in college. So I thought this would be fun. Why don't we do some sort of modern day but sort of Cold War callback in Berlin? And he loved the idea. And that's kind of again that was one of the first choices, and then it was murder mystery, spies, East
Hmm.
Germany, Stasi, Berlin Wall, just throwing all these recipe ingredients into the stew, and then kind of coming up with it from there. And then thematically, in terms of like what is it about where the character's going from the last book to this one, that was I would say that probably just kind of came during the writing. That was
Mhm.
that's the kind of thing it's hard for me to decide or figure out ahead of time. So
Right.
that's sort of what the process was. Yeah.
While recording, I hadn't read your introduction to this book, um, until we sat down to record it. I read the novel itself ahead of time, of course, just as part of the ordinary prep for the process. But um, I wanted the intro to be a surprise. I wanted that to be new, and I was really struck when you said that this was always intended to be his last book. If I'm remembering correctly, and please correct me if I'm wrong, was was that the case? Was he planning on retiring after this? And at what point did did this become part of the plan that this would be his last one, if indeed it was?
This was always going to probably be his last book, but there was going to be another book before it. He had another solo book
Okay.
that he was gonna write after the Maze. So the idea being he wrote the Cuban Affair, he wrote the Deserter,
Mhm.
he wrote the Maze, and then after that was Bloodlines, and then he was going to do a final solo book, and then the Tin Man being the third and final co-authored book. And then would he have done another book? Maybe. His he what he always wanted was to write a book without a deadline. So he said maybe I'll write one last book, and maybe if I do, there will be no deadlines in the contract, and that will
Right.
be that's kind of what he would have wanted. And when he had started this final solo book of his, and when he got ill, and we decided and we pitched to the publisher. Unfortunately, they said that's fine. We wanted to swap the order of the books and say let's do the um, co-author book first because obviously I could do most of the heavy lifting on that, and then we were optimistic that he would be able to do the third solo book after that. Obviously, it didn't work out,
Right.
but yeah,
Well, I remember while working on the maze, I had a sneaking suspicion. I didn't want it to be true, but thematically, the end was such a callback to the beginning of, the John
yes.
Corey series.
Well,
Yes, sitting
that
on
was
the
intended to be
porch.
the last Corey book. That was
Right,
definitely the last Corey book. The whatever book he was going to write, it wouldn't have been a Corey book.
right.
Um, yeah. So
Well,
you're right. It did have a full circle feel to
yeah,
it.
and it was
Yeah,
wonderful. The best stories, the ending always refers back to the beginning. So, um,
absolutely.
I think my favorite line that you wrote, and you've already said it here today, was in the intro when you said he lied to me and said it would be easy. I'm curious what it was that you found the biggest challenge. Was it just the sheer number, the volume of words? Was it um, having to make the adjustment from writing more with, thinking of, images rather than description, showing and not telling? What was it that was so difficult? Talk us, if you would, through that transition.
Sure. Part of it was the pacing. I think that even a quote unquote slow movie, I mean, if you read the script, there
Mhm.
is a level, every scene, there's a utilitarian quality to the scenes, and then every scene has to be doing five different things, and it's, you don't get to quite kind of indulge necessarily. And then with this book and knowing that my father tended to write long books anyway, I was like, oh great, I can really really spread my wings here. So I wasn't actually intimidated by the volume. It was more that I had to be reined in a little bit because I was suddenly feeling entirely untethered. And I do remember there was a couple times in the Deserter where I went off on some real tangents of stuff that was interesting to me and maybe a few other people, but not not didn't have a direct bearing on the story. And he kind of steered me back. That was one of the things was actually just getting understanding the new kinds of limitations of a novel versus a screenplay. Honestly, probably one of the hardest things was, and this was both difficult and in a way freeing, was I wasn't just writing a book, and I wasn't just writing a book with my dad. I was writing a Nelson DeMille book with my dad. I was writing a
Right.
book with him, by him, with his name on it. With that comes certain expectations, not just quality, but style, humor. So I was trying to figure out. I'm not. I can't nor would I want to try to mimic him, but this does have to be in the same universe and has to feel maybe 30 or 40 degrees different than Nelson DeMille book. Not, it's never to be all the way, nor do we want it to feel like a 180, you know. One of the first decisions I made for The Deserter, which I said to him, I said, I really want this book to be written in the third person because he'd become so well known for his first person
Yeah.
Corey, and also I think The Gold Coast with maybe John Sutter was maybe his first person book, but
Hmm.
a lot of the his deployment of humor came around the same time as he switched from third to first. And I wanted to kind of keep a lot of that humor and tone, but I said let's change the voice enough that it will just automatically feel different to a reader, even if they don't put it together.
Hmm.
That's why, you know. Um, and I wasn't sure that would actually be easier for me. And it actually was harder for him because he hadn't done it in so long. But he had
Oh,
a hard time switching back to third person because it was third person, but you're still in the point. You're still in the guy's head. You're in Scott Brodie's head. You're seeing the world through his eyes. You're learning everything through him.
yeah.
And any observation about somebody else, what they're thinking, how they look, it's all still from his point of view. But the language shift allows you to kind of your description that could be a little different. You're not quite as much kind of tied into his point of view as intensely. So that was an adjustment for him, and also for me. I was hoping it would make things easier. I'm not sure it did, but anyway, that is it. But it was freeing too because um I wasn't facing some sort of existential question of what kind of writer am I and who am I and is this, you know, am I writing something literary or commercial or something in between, and is this voice gonna work, and is this true to me? But I didn't have any of that neurotic crap because I was just like, we're writing a Nelson DeMille book. Nelson DeMille books are great. If I can pull something off that is, you know, lives up to that with him, of course, then I will have done my job. And so there was a level of like I'm riding in somebody else's vehicle, you know.
Yeah.
So that
I,
would be.
I every time I read one of Nelson's books and the three that you wrote together, I am always reminded of that Walt Whitman quote where he says, "I contain multitudes." I think your father was never afraid of switching uh, genres. Maybe not switching genres, but taking aspects from other genres. I mean,
Mhm.
hell, he wrote a novel about the quest for the Holy Grail. It's one of my favorite books that he wrote, and
Yeah,
this book is specifically for being so grounded in reality. It has elements of, you know, robotic warfare is essentially something that we would see in science fiction. There's a moment, and I don't want to spoil it for anybody who's watching this interview and hasn't read or listened to the book yet, but there's a moment with one of those robots, Lenny. I know I emailed you about it. Let's just say it has something to do with the input ports.
mhm.
That was as horrific an image as I have ever read, and and would be unnatural for like a sci-fi horror film, almost like Alien. So
Yeah.
I love the fact that you all were unafraid to step out and expand your horizons. And I'm just curious, where did that idea come from? At what point in the process? How long ago did you realize this book was going to be about next gen warfare and the intrigue, of course, but AI? Is it AI? Is it the is somebody manipulating these autonomous warriors? At what point did that idea come?
It's funny because it's almost hard to remember. It wasn't the first thing by any means. It wasn't let's make something about AI or robotics. I for this book I thought about setting. Well, I've always wanted to write a book set in the desert. I kind of
Hmm.
had an idea that this might be the last Brodie Taylor book, or if at least maybe not, but at least probably the last one that would be co-authored. I kind of wanted to bring it back to the home front and make this really be a book about America. So that plus desert, I was interested in um, the kind of rampant. abuse of drugs and performance enhancing drugs and other kinds of drugs among especially elite soldiers who are dealing with all these stresses. But again, they're on the home front. The war on terror is kind of over, or it's become something else. And again, what does a soldier do when a soldier no longer is fighting a war? So all those kind of things came into my mind. I started thinking about the Jason Bourne stories and
Hmm.
the kind of ways that they were almost hacking these humans to turn them into
Yeah.
super soldiers. And I was talking to my father about all this stuff, and I don't know if he came up with the idea, but he definitely, if I came up with it, I said, but we shouldn't do that. And he said, no, we should. He was the one actually pushing the tech stuff. He said, I said, I think I'm worried that's going to be doing robots. And I was even not even using the word robot in the book. I think I maybe used the word robot once because
Right.
I have this real don't have an aversion to sci-fi. I have an aversion to this book coming off as sci-fi because it's not, and I wanted it to feel as much like a thriller about now or maybe about like a week from now, with the conventions of a thriller and a military thriller. But putting if you take a book that's not sci-fi and you put sci-fi elements into it, that doesn't make the book less real. It makes the sci-fi elements more real. Hopefully,
Right.
that's the hope, and that's to me that's also what's scary about it. It almost doesn't feel that speculative. But he was the one who said, the publishers are going to love this. This is very much about now. He had a lot of faith in me because he wouldn't write that book on his own, but he he said, let's do it. Let's go. Let's pitch it. I think they're going to like it. So he really is on the one that encouraged that because if it wasn't for him, I'm not sure it would have been a different book. I mean, it would have had the same setting and a lot of the same characters, and it would have been a murder mystery, but it might have been more about some super drug or something. I'm
Hmm.
not really sure, but so that once we had that thought, that idea, there's a mention in the book about the Chinese terracotta army, that was buried
Yeah.
with the first Chinese emperor, and that was his idea, and that was his visual and his image was this idea of these things that are real but not real. They're kind of shaped like people, but they're inert and they're underground, but they're imbued with some power,
Right.
and that image and that association of that was like it set off all these ideas, inspirations for me of what to run with. And that's also what was so special about it because, he was sick for almost the entire writing of the book, and when he started chemo, fortunately, he was still it hadn't quite worn him down quite as much yet, so he could still be involved, but eventually he couldn't be. But I did very much feel like I was playing on a stage that we both kind of set together,
Yeah.
and that kind of gave me a lot of strength, and especially after he died and I was still writing the book, I kind of
Yeah.
felt, you know, his voice was there in my head saying yes, sometimes saying that's not good, Alex, don't write that, or so it had almost a weird natural progression to it, the
Whose idea
process.
was it to name each of these, well, for lack of a better word, robots, these autonomous weapons, according to their baseball numbers, the numbers on baseball players' jerseys? Where did that come from?
He said these things need nicknames. He said you can't just call
Right.
it number whatever or this or it can't be anonymous. They have to have, and soldiers give everything nicknames. You need to give them nicknames. And I was giving them numbers, and I don't know. Again, I don't know who said what, but it became nicknames, numbers, jerseys. And it was
Hmm.
like, okay. It's going to be sports, and eventually, okay, I didn't. It was too. It felt too vague to just be sports in general. So it's like, what's the most American sport? Baseball. Neither of us know much of anything about baseball. He never followed professional sports, and as such, neither did I. Like I'm the only person of my entire friend group growing up who didn't know everything about the Mets and the New York Islanders and all this
Sure.
stuff. So it was kind of funny that I was taking this on. So I had to enlist some friends and say, okay, who's first of all, um, who's a baseball player you really hate? Who has a good name?
Bucky, of course.
Well, Bucky, yeah, Bucky, yeah, certain people hate Bucky, but more for his maybe his achievement rather than the kind of person he is. He's still alive. Because I felt a little bad about naming the main, one of the main antagonists after him, but there were some others that were a little easier to choose. But the reader will see, and they'll have their own opinions, I think.
Sure.
Because of course, as somebody who doesn't know baseball that well, I'm like, oh, Mickey Mantle, Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig. I mean, all the very obvious players that I know, but it's so many of these great names and great personalities and great nicknames of these players that I didn't know off the top of my head that I was able to get other people to give me some pointers on. Actually, the funny thing now that I remember, um, was it God? It's John Karp, the CEO of Simon Schuster. I think when he read the pitch, and I can't remember we had the player have a certain name, and I don't know if he said, it should why that player shouldn't it be Bucky Dent or vice versa, but there was something with Bucky Dent that because he also follows baseball, so I'm like, okay, put it in my head that a lot of people know a lot more about this than I do, and they're gonna have opinions, and if you name number 12 for this other guy, you're gonna have to get some letters. So it was interesting.
We've talked about what makes this story powerful, where the story came from. What do you think the listeners will find powerful about this story, specifically for the audiobook?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm hearing the book all the time. When I'm writing it, even before I'm writing it, when I'm coming up with the dialogue or I'm coming up with the description, I hear my voice in my head reading it. It's like the audiobook is already going in my head, and then I write it down, and then when I read it again, it is playing back for me. So I do think what's something special about audiobooks in particular, and especially with a good narrator, is you really are taking in the tempo and the feeling that truly is going on inside of the author's head as they are writing it. And this one is a lot. It's really kind of tactile. I mean, it's set in the desert with harsh desert elements and the heat and the cold desert nights and the wind and sandstorms and the sounds of like the metallic clanging of these titanium robots. And I think more than the other books, even this one, the sounds and the sights were front and center for me. So I think that hopefully that quality of the book will come through, especially for audiobook listeners.
I have people who will say to me that they wish that there was music in audiobooks, that they miss the soundtrack, and I always tell them the writing is the soundtrack. As you say, the clank of the of the gears of the whether servos, whatever, the whirring, and that is part of the soundtrack. And something I have to just one more compliment in a long series of them. You and your father totally understood. There is a grammar to silence, and there are so many times where it's referenced. Um, he didn't reply. She didn't reply, and and it's absolutely true. And every time I would see one of those, every time I would come across one of those in the text, you have to pause because it usually follows a really heavy moment,
Right,
in an argument, a confrontation, what have you, you know. Um,
absolutely.
and there is to me there really is a soundtrack, and I completely agree. I think listeners are going to be thrilled with this book because of the way that you guys approached the subject, you and your father, and yeah, I can't wait to see the response.
Same here. Thank you. I'm just really curious about, I mean, your process in general, your process for reading this book, like how you prepare. And you'd mentioned the scene that we're not going to give away involved this kind of horrific scene with one of the robots. But I was wondering how the actual contents of your reading affects your performance and how much of that's voluntary versus just kind of feeling the words and just what your prep process is too. I'm just really curious about that.
Oh, thanks. We go with what's on the page. So when we did The Deserter, I had to brush up on a lot of Latin American accents. Thankfully, I took a lot of years of Spanish in high school. And the same thing with Bloodlines. German is one of my favorite accents. Um, but there's the general accents, and then there are the specific accents, and so some take longer to familiarize yourself with than others. Simon and Schuster is wonderful to work with because they'll give you these pronunciation guides for words and phrases that uh, you know from foreign languages, that kind of thing. Things that
Hmm.
I wouldn't ordinarily say in my everyday speech. And so in many ways, I'm taken care of. That work has been done for me, other than, the accent prep. After that, I start thinking, well, I try to approach it like a writer does. The first thing I do is I say, well, who's the protagonist? And it's not always the main character, it's the character who changes. And okay, well,
Hmm.
if that's the case, then after determining who the changing character is, I have to track that change. If let's say it's a book, thematically it would be like the movie Giant. It's about tolerance. Um, if the guy starts off intolerant here, and at the end of the book he is far more tolerant, well, then every time that issue comes up, I have to make sure that I'm raising the stakes and creating
Hmm.
essentially a wave on the bar graph. So it's not
Right.
a surprise when that change happens. Um,
Right. Right.
but then there are little small things, and I really wanted to make sure to thank you for this. Sometimes I wait for inspiration to hit on certain things until I sit in this chair. And in this case, I wanted to wait. I wondered about it for the longest time. How do you handle these, automatons, these beings that have no human emotion? How do you handle that without making it boring for the listener? I can't be
Yeah.
speaking in a monotone. Um, and it was you and your dad, whoever's idea it was to put in the reference to Hal from 2001, just unlocked
Yeah.
it for me, because that
Hmm.
is one of the most on my laptop upstairs, on my when I make a mistake, I don't have the traditional um, uh, you know uh, pre-supplied mistake sound, the dunk sound. I have Hal's voice saying, "I'm sorry, Dave, I'm afraid I can't do that."
I love
So, there's nothing more frightening than
Yeah.
this thing you cannot reason with. And I just thought,
Right.
okay, great. I mean, I got to say that line out loud, which was wonderful, when you were talking about Hal. And then it became just the thing to do for Bucky, for Eleni, for any of them. I knew that their voice would always be the same. And
That's great.
yeah, you just kind of you go with what the author has given you and hope inspiration hits.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. You're, yeah, it's performance. You're an actor. It totally makes sense.
Right.
That's the process. Yeah.
Yeah. You said something interesting about the I think it was when you said your father told you that servicemen and women, they always give things nicknames. Um, it strikes me that of all the books that he's written throughout his career, these three that you wrote together are the ones that are closest to his specialized skill set, because your father served, obviously. I mean, he spent really formative years of his life in the military. And I'm curious. I mean, of course, he had dealt with a lot of that before. I remember Upcountry was all about going back to Vietnam and talking about military experience in the past, but this was ongoing. And did you all have to consult with, technical advisors, for lack of a better word, or was your dad always just the one to say, no, they do this, they do this, they do this?
It was mostly him, and I gotta say, this is one of the things I was hesitant about this book, these books, because it was presented to me as military thrillers with, Army CID agents. Like, what do I know about any of this? And what he said was, look, they can be anywhere. They can go they can do anything, any crime anywhere in the world involving the military. It doesn't have to be, that specialized. as far as the knowledge you might need, because the knowledge you have is how to tell a good story with good characters. But when it came to, yeah, how military people think and act, that really was mostly him. Every once in a while, his knowledge sort of ends in late 60s, so there were
Mm,
certain things that have changed. I don't mean culturally, because a lot of the cultural stuff maybe hasn't changed as much. It's really more the technical stuff, the type of protocols and the type of, obviously, the type of equipment. But um so for me, I really did always have him as kind of a safety net. So I almost felt I had the right to write these books, because I knew I was working with him, and he would catch things that didn't feel right, or weren't accurate to the military. Um, for this book, ironically, the one he was not around for the whole time is the one that's actually set on a military base, and is in a
right.
lot of ways the most about the military. I was like, oh God, what the hell did I do? And a friend of mine she was an officer in the Marines, so I gave her the book. I said, tell me
Mm,
what I got wrong. Fortunately, she said, you've done your research, and there's not too much here for me to tell you, which
well,
was
that's
good.
great.
Some little stuff, but nothing big, which is great. Also, making up a place, Camp Hayden is a fictional place. I
Mm,
feel like I gave myself a little license for things don't have to work properly here. This is a weird, specialized place. It's okay if their protocols are a little off. They should be. This place is not, it's not a typical army base by any means. So between that, the creative license, his input, especially in the early stages of the book, and then my friends, I felt that was that was the backbone of any of the military stuff in there.
I remember speaking with you at a number of his book launches over the years. I don't remember if I ever told you this story, and for the listener, I hope everybody will indulge me. There's a story specifically about the military that if I hadn't shared it with you, it was years ago. Nelson and Sandy and James were going to go down to Fort Myers in Florida for a vacation. And then the Fort Myers Reading Festival reached out to him and said, would you speak at our event? And he called me out of the blue and said, I don't know if I want to do it. It would be interrupting our vacation, but they told me they invited you, and if you're going to go, then I'll go. And it was lovely getting to spend time. Um, Unbeknownst to your dad, a number of people who served in his unit made the cross country trek. Some of them in wheelchairs and on crutches.
Wow.
And there was a banquet on the opening night of this festival, and I got to watch as your father approached this table. And the whole part of it was, oh, you get to have dinner with this author, and the money raised is for charity. And he comes walking up, and he's looking around to say hello to everyone, and the look on his face, he was just so nonplussed. Why do these people look so familiar? And it took him a moment to place it, and they all stood up and they saluted him,
Wow.
and they presented him with, if I'm remembering correctly, it was a saber. I have photos. I can send them to you. Um,
That's incredible.
it was a unit honor. I believe it was a saber, and they came to present it to him, and they thanked him for saving their lives, for bringing them home
Wow.
safely.
Wow.
And the following day, I got to interview him in front of a packed audience, and there they were, all front and center in the front row. And at the end of it, I remember saying, Nelson, I've been able to thank you for a lot of things over the years: your generosity, your marvelous writing, your literary legacy. But I've never had the opportunity to thank you for your service. But I do so now. And yeah, we were able to take photos with them afterwards. It was a privilege to be there and to be able to witness it.
That's really beautiful. I received some of those, probably some of the same guys. They sent me a signed plaque, kind of in his honor, and it was all their signatures were on it. They sent one for me and my sister, and my brother. And
Yeah.
it was really a special thing to receive. And I've seen a couple of them at his signings as well, and it's a reminder of this other part of his life that I,
Yeah.
don't think about as much, and the relationship he had with these other people that are, yeah, I mean, he it's an incredible responsibility that you
Yeah.
have, right, as an officer in the field like that, and yeah.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier just in passing, will there be more books in this series? Speak, if you will, about being able to participate in your father's legacy and what that's going to look like moving forward.
Yeah, it was a big responsibility. I know what it looks like for an author to suddenly, suddenly their family member's name appears in their book, and a lot of people are like, oh boy, here's the slide down into mediocrity or worse. So I felt like I really, because I cared a lot about writing. I've been writing a long time. I wasn't writing novels, but I had when I was younger because I'm like, I want to do what my dad does. Um, so I felt, in some ways, I felt prepared, but also, yes, with this great need to not want to disappoint his readers and make sure that it was, again, not going to ape him. Can't. He's a singular voice, but can I add to? Can I be additive to this? Not replacing and not lessening either. So there was a bit of about anxiety, but once we got going and I kind of understood what it was we were doing, and I sort of understood that I'd inherited, I'm not saying his talent, I've inherited his taste in a lot of ways. I inherited the things he cared about, the things he thought were funny, the things he thought were scary, the things he thought were important and beautiful in the world and ugly in the world, and those things all came through in the writing, and that's why it felt in a lot of ways like we may have differed sometimes on how to do something, but we never really differed on like what to be doing. It did kind of feel like we were both coming into this with very similar values, not just about storytelling, but just about the world. And Yeah, so it was obviously a real privilege to work with him and spend that much time with him. And it did feel kind of like it doubled my time with him. I had my time with him as his son, as this personal relationship, and then we also got to talk shop and talk story and in very granular way with our pages. So that was a real privilege for me. I will always be grateful for it. And I he he took a risk on me,
Mm,
because he says to the publisher, "What? How about my son writes with me?" And of course, they probably all got real tense when he said that. But he took a risk. I guess they took a risk, and it worked out. And I hope the readers were um, happy about it, and happy about these books we did. They seem to have been well received. I do get asked the question a lot, are you going to write more John Corey books? And I will say here and now that I am not going to write more John Corey books, because there was one John Corey, and it
right.
came from my dad, and I think there is a level, there's a way with this market, to keep things going forever and make sequels to
Sure.
sequels and prequels to sequels, and
Sure.
I understand that, but we have to be. He wrote those books. He wrote 8 of them. They're great. I wouldn't do it justice, and on the other hand, the Brodie Taylor books, we created these characters together. I've become quite enamored with them, and I would, if somebody's interested, I would be happy to continue those adventures. I do have another idea for a book that I'm actually, my agents are pitching right now. It's a bit of a departure, but it's still in the thriller realm. I'm not probably ready to get into details now, but it does continue a little bit of the Tin Men elements, where you have the real world with some elements that maybe would have been sci-fi 10 or 20 years ago, but are starting to maybe feel like they could be real.
Like,
So
going from science
yeah,
fiction to science fact at this point. Yeah.
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
that's exciting. I'm really happy to hear that. Um,
Yeah.
you were right. There is only one Corey.
Yeah.
Every now and again, when I go to events, people will say to me, I'm such a huge fan of the John Corey books. Can you give me a little bit of John Corey? Can you do his voice? And I always tell them the exact truth. I can't, because I don't have your dad's words to read. It's like me doing
Mm.
the accent is nothing. It's a,
Mm.
kind of
Mm.
Manhattan, New York accent, very generic. It's the, it's just that the patois. I mean, it is unique to that character. And I'm like, I'm sorry, unless you have a copy of the
Yeah.
script of the book, I can't do it,
Right,
you know?
right. And did they ever then pull out the book and say, here?
No, not yet, not yet. But if they ever do, I'm happy to do it. It's interesting when I was working on this book, and um, you know, I'm the kind of guy who always cries at Hallmark commercials. I'm a very emotional guy. But I'll tell you this: Richard Brewer, who was the director of the last two, Bloodlines and The Tin Men, um, he'll tell you how many times I had to stop because I was weeping. It was just so poignant knowing that we were that this was the last go round. Hopefully not for the characters, according to what you just told me, but it actually felt really wonderful because knowing your background as a screenwriter, I felt like I was, not, I don't know, for lack of a better word, performing it. It was like doing it on audio feels like, well, this is your background. I'm saying these words aloud. I feel like, it's a movie without images. Um,
Yeah.
I've always been really grateful for the chance to read these aloud. Have you ever listened to any of your dad's books aloud, or to any author's works on audio?
I don't, it's funny. When I was younger, I did. I was really loved it. I don't know why I stopped, but this conversation in part is making me want to do it again. I listened to some of, you know, The Deserter and Bloodlines, just out of wanting to hear how you did it, and it was wonderful. But it was also hearing your own words back to you,
Yeah,
even if they're read very well, can sometimes be it's hard to listen to it as a book. Much in the same way when you're reading your book and you're trying to pretend like you're a reader, you can't do that either.
right.
But no, I would like to get back into audiobooks. It's a great art form, and it's also a time when you have this kind of booming industry in podcasts and the audio only, radio podcast audiobooks. It's I think it's a great, like, kind of rediscovery of this very specific, special form of media. So I
Yeah.
am very happy with how popular they are, continue to be. I'm very happy that you have been lending your talents to them, and I know that it's gone over very well, and the readers and the listeners really love what you bring to it, and you do bring John Corey. Even if you need the words in front of you, it is you do bring it.
Well, I'm glad. I always have. I always will. That need those words to make it real. Alex, this has been an absolute pleasure. I don't even know how
Same,
to
Scott.
thank you. This has been it's a lovely coda to it's a wonderful way to celebrate your father's work, but also to look ahead and see what's coming for you. I'm delighted that you had this opportunity to work with him. Delighted that you came up with Brodie and Taylor, and I can't wait to see what happens next.
Thank you so much, Scott. It was really, really wonderful to talk to you. This is Alex DeMille, co-author of The Tin Men with my father, Nelson DeMille.
And this is Scott Brick, the narrator of The Tin Men by Nelson and Alex DeMille. And thank you for joining us. We appreciate you listening.